right, welcome to the Good Lie and the Greater Good. My co-host and I were talking last night about the ruling by a judge where undocumented immigrants have the right to own judge. And I'm going to go ahead and say this is actually really interesting and complicated as far as I'm concerned because the libertarian in me says yes, someone should have the ability to own a gun, full stop. But and there's a lot of caveats to this, but even the quote unquote libertarian in me will acknowledge that you have to have the ability to make contracts with people. And when we look at our constitution, which is a contract between the people and the government, saying in order for us to function together, this is what we will provide each other. It's reciprocity. It goes back and forth, right? So in this case, like an illegal alien is not part of the people. But it doesn't change the fact that they should still have the right to protect themselves, but they don't need to necessarily be granted the full slate or the full access to the lunchtime buffet that the people would have in that same country. So in this case, like what we kind of want to talk about, what we want to pay attention to in the first place is like my co-host was like, I think this is going to lead to like a massive civil unrest, and I'm not necessarily going to argue for or against that. I do think it could potentially lead to that route. It would make sense that like if quote unquote illegals were able to have possess firearms, um there's going to be some type of reaction that would be within the range of outcomes for you know uh that occurring. Illegals able to carry guns. On the other side of the equation on this is it creates a two-tier system within the United States between obviously the illegals having less of a roadblock to be able to get guns than your actual citizens do, because your citizens have to follow laws, because they can't just go, there's no such thing as a gun show loophole. You can't just go down and buy a gun from a federally licensed gun dealer without going through a whole bunch of hoops and background checks and potentially, like, for machine guns and stuff like that, tax stamps. Like, it is a process. If I wanted to go get a handgun today in most of the country, like, I can't go get a handgun. I have to like literally stand in line at the DMV, but for weeks or months in order to get some of these firearms. Which you're saying that since illegal is already illegal and they don't have the documentation, they would not be able to go through that route. In order to get a firearm, they actually have to possess it illegally in the first place, because they can't purchase it legally. So the possession part is kind of separated from that. Well, how the fuck did you get that? Right. And then I was telling my co-host last night when we were talking, like there are court cases where felons who are legally not able to possess firearms have or have not been charged with possession of a firearm during the process of a justifiable homicide, i.e., and I pointed out to him, like, the felon is like, well, I don't know how that gun got in my hand, but once it got in my hand, I had to defend myself. So they can either be charged with the possession of the firearm after the fact, even though the homicide is justified, or they can't be charged with the possession of the firearm because the police or the state has to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they possessed it before needing it to defend themselves, because that would be a affirmative defense. So anyway, and again, don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. This is me just trying to understand stuff. You should go look up stuff on your own. So anyway, the idea behind this, and we'll have to go look at the Second Amendment in the first place, is a well-regulated militia. So what this would be, to break this down, is a small city that is basically able to defend itself without having to go to the government for help. That is what a militia would be. It's not a standing military operated by the government. Being necessary for the security of a free state, yes, because that the state would be the compact between the people and the government. The right of the people, in this case the citizenry of the state, to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So remember that regulated in the context of like 1776 meant like you're maintaining your equipment, right? So to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We already have the problem that the government has set all these, the government at local levels and state levels and federal levels have already set all these hoops for everybody to go jumping through, right? So they've already infringed on the right of the citizenry to own guns. Now, you or I may disagree on certain levels of things, like Mick nukes versus Mick machine guns, But at the end of the day, like the plain text of the Second Amendment is really just not something that we can argue about. Like we can kind of try and nitpick words here or there, but the basic idea behind it is thus. And then having a Obama era judge in this case, you know, throw out a charge because they say that the illegal immigrant is able to have the same protection that a citizen does. Well, it's just a complete misunderstanding of what the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment is. Like, no, you don't get those rights because you're not a citizen, first and foremost. But the actual act of self defense, like that can be something that we can talk about because that's not what's enumerated under the Second Amendment. But the actual act of self defense, that's a different conversation to be had. So in this case, like yeah, like we can go down that road of whether or not illegals or even foreign nationals should be able to possess and own firearms in the U.S. That is a much different conversation because then you have to open the door to, hey, maybe our citizens should be able to have the equal access to these guns that the illegals do, and that because you have a intellectually limited, ideologically biased judge trying to make this ruling, not realizing what they're going to go or what cause and effects that they're going to have because of this, the consequences. So in this case, like what we're kind of looking at further, like my co-host was talking about between civil unrest, well, that's what the idea is, that this judge's ruling is trying to allow for more gun control to the point where guns just become illegal. The Second Amendment becomes obsolete. They can get rid of it. Intentions are separated from uh actual consequences of actions. So in this case, on the opposite side, we could wind up with court rulings that or take away more of the infringement by the state on the Second Amendment in response to this, because someone like this is not thinking more than one step ahead. They're just like, oh well, like these gun nuts won't give up their guns. Well, I'll just say that like illegals should have the right to guns, and it's like, okay, those terms are acceptable as long as I have the same ability to get guns that they do. They can't legally buy them. Why do I have to legally buy them in order to get them? So like now you can't actually prosecute people for illegally, or citizens for illegally obtaining firearms, because an illegal alien can't legally follow the laws in order to legally obtain them. So it's not the actual possession of the firearm is the problem. Again, they're just not walking down the street finding it on the middle of the yellow line and then tucking it in their waistband. That's not what's occurring. More than likely you have to go out and you have to possess things. So even to the idea of making good decisions or following the law are things that have to be taken into account when it comes to this, because again, like the government doesn't magically hand you a firearm at birth in this country. Now we could argue about whether or not they should do that or not, and if that would fall underneath the Second Amendment. But at the end of the day, like why are they able to get a hold of one in the first place when I have to go through a background check, and they don't even have to show proper documentation to get across the border illegally? So anyway, those are just kind of my thoughts on this stuff, and I don't want to go too long, but yeah,